Hello, all. Thank you for joining us on the niche marketing webinar today. Our speaker is Dr. Adam Davis, who is professor and head of the Department of Crop Sciences at the University of Illinois. And he's going to present on an exploration of the enabling conditions needed to support specialty crops and niche markets. I'm going to hand over to you, Adam, and let you take it away. We're going to hold questions until the end, but feel free to put them in the chat so that we cover them when we get to the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much for the opportunity to speak to your group. I met Russ Hyatt this winter at the Chicago Farmers Meeting and had a great talk with him about the society. So since 2018, I've had the privilege of serving as the head of the UI Department of Crop Sciences. My personal area of scholarship is agricultural ecology with a focus on weed management. For the past few decades, my research program has focused on understanding how agroecosystem design can better support weed control. As shown in this picture, Illinois agriculture is extraordinarily productive. We're #1 in soybean production in the US, #2 in corn, and #1 in pumpkins and horseradish. McLean County in particular has been first in the nation for corn and soybean production in multiple years. So why am I giving a talk called Future Proofing Illinois Agriculture? Because I think that the very thing that defines Illinois' success as an agricultural powerhouse, its preeminence in and primary focus on corn and soybean production, is also leading to growing instability in the system. So I'll begin by setting context for the talk centered on multiple stresses and risks in ag. And then I'll share some of the science behind risk mitigation with diversity, focusing on bet hedging and ecosystem service provisioning. And then finally, I'll talk about how we can move forward by creating enabling conditions for future proofing and paying attention to how more diversified production systems perform over time. So there are multiple stresses and expectations on agriculture with damage and risk accumulating over time, sometimes somewhat invisibly. I'm showing a cornice here because sometimes a risky situation isn't immediately apparent. I used to do some backcountry skiing and found myself on a cornice one time without realizing it. In the next section, I'll show some examples of risk and stress in agriculture. We'll begin with the biophysical production environment, which has been changing rapidly over the past few decades. One of the most frequent observations about climate change is that the planet is generally warming. These data from NOAA show that this trend is accelerating, with the last 10 years being the hottest since records began in 1850. In Illinois, the warming is especially concentrated in the winter and the spring months. We're also seeing much more intense rainfall events in recent years. The picture on the right shows a way of thinking about the changes in Illinois' production environment over the coming decades in terms of similarity to the current climate of more southerly states, seeing Illinois kind of tracing over time towards southeast Texas. In the next few slides, I'll show some scenes from 2019 when the weather was particularly weird. So 2019 started off very wet, and over spring break, I traveled to New Orleans with my family by train. We actually had to stop in Jackson, Mississippi, though, and take a bus. This shot is from the bus on the freeway the rest of the way because Amtrak didn't want to send us over the Bonnet-Carré spillway, shown here. Enough water had come down the Mississippi in March of 2019 that the river was in flood stage, and the spillway was opened to avoid flooding New Orleans. The spillway is miles long, with more water passing through it in an hour than passes over Niagara Falls in a day. Draining water quickly through tile lines does help prepare our fields for planting in Illinois, but it can also create flooding downstream. By June 2nd of 2019, things were still cool and wet, and the only active plants on the landscape were small woodlots and some pasture areas and winter annual weeds. To me, this photo says a lot about the opportunities we lose when we focus only on summer annual crop species. There's a lot of sunlight and moist soil going unused in this picture. As springs get wetter, the number of workable field days decreases. This trend has been accompanied by an increase in farm size, as we'll see in the coming section. Trying to get over more acres in less time with less people has placed an extraordinary strain on the system, especially for custom applicators. By midsummer in 2019, it was bone dry, hadn't rained for weeks, and we were missing the water that we'd sent down the rivers earlier that spring. Warming soils caused nutrients to mineralize, and a pulse of rain in early August washed them into the Vermilion River, causing an algal bloom that led to a fish kill, shown here at one of my favorite fishing areas that was not very fishable on that day. Next, we'll look at risks associated with markets and economics. Deep consolidation is a feature of Illinois agriculture and continues to increase. In this slide, you can see consolidation in the ag industry, in farmland, and crop species. When more acres, capital, and influence are controlled by fewer actors, we get self-reinforcing policy and economic landscapes that are very tilted towards maintaining the status quo and reducing flexibility and innovation by farmers. Especially with multinational corporations, the focus is mainly on short-term profit and share prices. The concentration of power in the input and processing sectors also results in what's known as the price-cost squeeze, where both the input and processing share of the farm gate dollar grow over time, whereas the value of the farm product tends to be a diminishing part of the whole. Profit margins in corn and soybean production are often slim, with prices largely fluctuating around plateaus for long stretches of time. You can see here in this farm doc graph. At the same time, inflation erodes the value of the dollar, and input costs mostly continue to rise, exacerbating a price-cost squeeze. A response to the persistently low margins in grain crop markets has been for growers to work more ground, as I'm sure you're aware, to make a viable income for their family. The table on the left shows that since 1997, farms over 2,000 acres have more than doubled from 16 to 33% of Illinois farmland. While farm size has grown, however, the overall cash rental rate has remained the same at around 50%. For larger farms, closer to 70% of the acres are rented. This creates more risk for growers, as we'll see in the next slide. Net returns to farmers have been very volatile over the past 25 years, with some very good years interspersed with a lot of tough ones, and especially more recently. We've also seen the price-cost squeeze worsen in recent years with some consistently negative returns. This is especially true for cash rented ground, shown here for central Illinois. On top of all the other challenges, heavy US tariffs on international trade in 2025 created a situation in which markets for our exports plummeted. Despite the US-China soybean deal, the projected soybean trade volume would still be 14% lower than the 5-year average from 2020 to 2024. Next, we'll look at environmental externalities. An externality is just a fancy term for making your problem someone else's problem. The way we manage agricultural operations has effects that extend beyond the farm and that are not generally priced into the system. Many of the environmental externalities in agriculture have to do with water flow, and water contamination. On the left side of the slide are externalities related to water, including soil erosion at the top left and flooding at the bottom left. Cover cropping is still a rare practice in Illinois, with less than 5% of our field crop production acres receiving cover crops. Because our main crops are summer annuals growing between spring and fall, the overwinter and early spring periods are vulnerable to soil erosion. Tile drainage is a key soil management practice in Illinois, helping soils dry out quickly in spring so that they can be planted. While this allows us to achieve higher yields, it also means that water moves quickly through the landscape, potentially causing flooding downstream. On the right side of this slide, we have externalities related to water contamination by agrochemicals. The top right figure shows additional cancers per year associated with differences in agricultural pesticide application rates. And you can see that in particular, the I states are really lit up here in terms of additional cancers. The bottom right figure shows agricultural nitrogen loading rates from production fields into the Mississippi drainage basin. It's no accident that the highest rates in each figure are concentrated over the I states. This is where field crop agriculture is most intensive, with correspondingly high levels of agrochemical inputs. The dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico is probably the most well-known environmental externality from agriculture. Nutrients lost from ag soils in the Mississippi drainage basin find their way downstream into the Gulf, and there fertilize large algal blooms, shown here from space. When those algae die, their decomposition by bacteria consumes large amounts of oxygen, resulting in massive fish kills and angry fishermen. Finally, we'll look at weed management. I've saved this stress for last because I think it contains elements of all the former ones and will ultimately force changes if we continue on the current path. As shown in the panel on the left, pesticide productivity has been declining for more than 30 years. Decades of over-reliance upon herbicides and a failure to use other tools for integrated weed management have led to a growing herbicide resistance crisis. In some places, herbicide resistance is still in its early to mid stages. Not so in central Illinois. Less than 10 miles to the east of my office where I'm giving this presentation to you right now, there's a field with a 6-way multiple resistant population of tall water hen. It's gained a new form of resistance every few years since the early 2000s. If this continues, we will lose chemical control of weeds in my area. In the absence of new compounds on the market, old herbicide compounds are making a comeback with new uses. Growth regulator tolerant soybeans, such as dicamba tolerant soybeans released in 2016, have been adopted by many farmers with herbicide resistance problems. Unfortunately, use of dicamba for late post-weed control applications to these soybean crops has led to damage on neighboring fields of non-tolerant soybeans, as shown in the cupping here, as well as damage to non-target species. I was visiting a prairie restoration in 2017 and saw this sylphium plant here exhibiting signs of growth regulator damage. It was more than a mile from the nearest conventional farm. Off-site damage problems due to volatilization of dicamba from late post-emergent applications, combined with spray drift due to time pressure on operators to make applications in borderline wind and temperature conditions, has unleashed immense angry feedback against the system and calls for greater regulation of agricultural chemicals. This is not going away and can result in new legal constraints on field crop producers. Here you can see some tree leaves that were damaged from dicamba drift in the summer of 2024 when I was walking across campus here. Both the plant growth regulator damage problem and its potential solution are related to cropping system diversity. In this figure, the capital D stands for diversity and is related to this interlocking systems of economic, ecological, and management diversity. So in a low cropping system diversity situation, the price to cost squeeze from the very slim margins for these undifferentiated crops forces growers to grow more acres. At the same time, growing or managing more acres leads to a low eyes to the acre ratio and low management diversity. In such systems, herbicides tend to drive weed control, creating strong, uniform selection pressures for herbicide resistance. And because of that, high rates of herbicide resistance and, more importantly, multiple herbicide resistance evolution. This creates a need for new chemical options, but unfortunately, there's a near empty pipeline from our ag chemical industry. Nothing for at least several years out. We're in a situation where herbicide-tolerant plant growth regulator crops, plus late post-emergent applications, plus a nearly impossible label to follow for dicamba, plus the high speed that applicators have to travel at to get over all those acres, this creates problems with chemical trespass and the public anger that threatens to create more regulations for the ag industry. In contrast, in diversified cropping systems, which include the niche markets that you folks are interested in today, when you have diverse crops, you get shifting and diverse management tactics, which can lead to weed life cycle disruption. This creates ecosystem services for weed management that provide a weed suppressive base for multi-tactic integrated weed management systems. In these systems, herbicides tune rather than drive weed management, and that creates a lower risk of chemical trespass as well as less selection for herbicide resistance and multiple herbicide resistance. And moreover, diverse products from the farm buffer farm income against market, climate, and pesticide resistance shocks. In this section, I'll discuss more broadly how farming and cropping systems diversity can help to mitigate risks in agriculture. The basic idea of the portfolio management theory on the left is that adding well-chosen complementary stocks to your portfolio helps to reduce stock-specific risk up to a point, after which you just have kind of underlying volatility of markets, which is a feature that can't go away. So you certainly wouldn't try to retire on a stock portfolio with 2 stocks. That would feel risky. And yet, here we are in a system in Illinois where we just have 2 crops for all intents and purposes. Why are we doing this? Why are we exposing ourselves to all sorts of unnecessary risk? As shown in the next slide, benefits from cropping system diversity go beyond simple financial bet hedging. So farming system and cropping system diversity helps to generate ecosystem services. An ecosystem service is the production of a good that would usually require an external chemical or energy input and is instead provided by an ecosystem function. And examples of this are buffering types of services for weather, market volatility, pest management, soil carbon sequestration, or agroecosystem maintenance through efficient nutrient cycling or soil conservation, and also the support of biodiversity through beneficial species and habitat for non-crop species. In systems like this, you need crop and livestock species and management diversity, and not just a diversity of processing pathways. So one of the things that we have tended to do in Illinois is just try to find ever more uses for corn and soybean while doubling down on the two crop, or in some cases, just one crop system. And that's not enough to create ecosystem services. This photo shows an essential ecosystem service provided by cover crops. This field, or the lack thereof, this field was in soybean stubble, and it was finished and planted to corn, and then it rained 2 inches in a few hours, and this moonscape was the result. This occurred just about 10 miles to the east of Maine. The field was then replanted with additional time and input costs, as well as loss of yield potential and topsoil. This photo shows the neighbor's field after the same rainstorm. The soil is all there, but there's another important point that I want to make with this slide. The farmer ran a test strip to look at what his cover crop was getting him in terms of winter annual weed control, and the difference is clear to see between what's going on in the rye cover crop here and the weedy mess in the bare soil with winter annuals on it. Several years ago, I founded the Idea Farm Network. It's a peer-to-peer information exchange network for growers. And we wanted to support their efforts at innovation, both in management practices, but also marketing. At this particular Idea Farm Network field day, we were visiting that neighbor who had planted the cover crops. He was experimenting with a custom planter that he made at home, with rye alternating with different targeted planting row species, in this case canola, and in this case tillage radish. And he was excited by the ability to no-till plant soybean green into mellow soil on 30-inch centers. A system like this can help alleviate field prep time crunches. The day before I took off for that trip in June 2019, this is what things looked like on the South Farms at the University of Illinois. The wheat was heading out, you can see in the background here, and the corn and soybean trials were a muddy mess with no emergence. At UI, we've invested in not one but 2 small grains breeders to help invigorate the development of new value chains for small grains in Illinois. Small grains market is already in place and can handle more grain. The region of Illinois where the wheat-soybean double crop has historically been profitable has been expanding northward due to a warming production environment. Our faculty in Illinois crop sciences are doing research and outreach on this topic, such as the Winter Wheat Double Crop Forum at Wren Lake College this past January. As a grad student, I was fortunate to be part of a long-term study that provided a proof of concept on the impact of field crop species diversification on ecosystem services called the Marsden Farm Study. The PI was Dr. Matt Liebman. And this study has continued for a couple of decades. The central hypothesis of the study was that cropping system diversification can promote development of ecosystem services over time, supplementing or eventually displacing the role of synthetic inputs on promoting crop productivity and profitability. So why should we expect cropping system diversification to help offset dependence on external inputs? Here are several potential ecosystem services that we hypothesize would be gained from this approach. First, the diversity productivity hypothesis suggests that as plant species richness of a community increases, overall primary productivity will rise. This could happen because of increased resource partitioning, such as the spatial partitioning of below-ground resources indicated by the different plant root architectures shown here. It could also happen because of mutualism, such as biological nitrogen fixation, that occur when forage legumes are included in the system. As parts of a cropping system are used as soil organic amendments, such as green manures, we can expect increases in soil carbon, leading to improved soil quality, as shown in the greater aggregation in the below soil, rather than the blockiness and massiveness in the above soil. And then finally, as more crop functional groups and life histories are introduced into the cropping system, we can expect a corresponding temporal diversity in management practices, leading to disruption of weed life cycles. We designed the study to include a gradient of cropping system diversity from a 2-year corn-soybean rotation to a 3-year sequence of corn and soybean followed by a small grain underseeded with red clover, to a 4-year rotation in which corn and soybean were followed by oat underseeded by alfalfa and a 4th year of alfalfa. Soils in the 3- and 4-year rotations were amended with composted dairy manure during the corn phase, whereas soils in the 2-year rotation received synthetic fertilizers applied at recommended rates during the corn and soybean rotation phases. The plots were relatively large, about a 1/3 acre each, so that we could use full-sized field equipment, as well as for relevance to growers during outreach sessions. So this next slide here shows results from 2003 through 2010. This is called a spider plot or radar plot. And the way it works is that along each of these axes, the values are normalized to 1 in relation to the largest value in each of the 3 treatments. Across the top of the plot are things that we want more of, including profit, which was the same in the 3 systems, harvested crop mass, which was higher in the diversified systems, soybean yield, which was higher in the diversified systems, maize yield, slightly higher in the diversified systems, and weed seed bank depletion, which is a good measure of long-term weed management success, was the same in all the systems. On the bottom side of this plot are things that we want less of. So we saw very large decreases in the need to use herbicides and synthetic inputs in the 3- and 4-year systems. We also saw less freshwater toxicity in those systems. And we also used less energy in the 3- and 4-year systems. You can see a trade-off between labor and energy use in this study. Since the additional labor did not reduce net profit, this could be a way of creating more employment opportunities on Illinois farms. As predicted from portfolio theory, the variance in the profit was reduced in the more diverse rotations compared to the less diverse one. This was based upon a key assumption, however, that a farmer could get paid to produce the forages in the more diverse systems, which generated substantial ecosystem services. To do this, one would need to reintegrate crop and livestock productions on farms like this in Illinois. That would require market diversification, infrastructure, and policies that would support such a move. So how do we get there in Illinois or in the states that you represent? I'll begin by proposing a basic game plan and then move into a couple of related projects at the University of Illinois. So the basic idea is to create enabling conditions that help farmers get paid to diversify their production systems. With more diverse and flexible production systems, value chains, and markets. This in turn would produce ecosystem and market services to make Illinois agriculture more resilient, more profitable, and more healthy. Let's talk more about those enabling conditions. So to future-proof Illinois agriculture, policy and investment should do a few things. First, it should create the space for innovation and flexibility for adaptation by farmers and society. Part of this is limiting the role of multinationals in dictating ag policy and changing current policies that hinder flexibility. Second, we need to actively work on and solve the chicken and egg problem in new value chain development. This is not just a would be nice to have, this is a must have. And to do that, we need to increase processing capacity for new crops. And we also need to have some investment in initial acres. We need to do things that help us manage risk, addressing foreseeable risks as well as preparing for unforeseeable risk. Some of that knowledge that we already have for managing risk. For example, diversification can be part of creating a buffered solution, a buffered production system. But as we move into the future, we will need to address emerging questions and understand them within the context of changing production environments, markets, and societal trends. And that'll require long-term studies as well. And finally, we need to do things that help reward risk mitigation. So for example, you might have a situation where crop insurance premiums are inversely proportional to risk reduction. So if somebody's really doing a lot of risk mitigation on their farm, they'd get lower insurance premiums. In solving this chicken and egg problem and new value chain development, we have some examples at UI. For example, Dr. Jonathan Kappas of the UI Department of Agricultural and Consumer Economics has talked with state legislators about working with Professor D.K. Lee and a clothing manufacturer like Carhartt to produce an Illinois work jacket out of locally grown fiber like hemp. This would require guaranteeing a sufficient supply to create the volume necessary to justify building new processing capacity. It's challenging, but concrete enough that it could be worked out. I was encouraged to see similar ideas be discussed at the Illinois Farm Bureau's 111th annual meeting, in which they said a new specialty crops subsection was added under the government farm policies title to emphasize specialty crops in relation to federal farm policies, specifically in the Farm Bill. And they're proposing that this be done, not that it necessarily was just added. But this is where local stakeholder organizations are helping to think about how we begin to energize new value chains. So one example of a project at University of Illinois that's addressing the need for energizing and de-risking new value chains that introduce more landscape level species and management diversity into the Illinois production landscape is the Illinois Biomass Innovation Hub. This is led by Dr. Emily Heaton, professor in the Illinois Crop Sciences Department. Here on the University of Illinois Energy Farm, we have a mixed species biomass stand in the foreground and then a miscanthus biomass stand in the background. Miscanthus is a very highly producing, dedicated bioenergy crop. The Biomass Innovation Hub is part of the broader UI campus innovation ecosystem. You can see underneath the Office of the Vice Chancellor for Research and Innovation, there are many units that are related to doing research. There are also farmers, industry, and policy makers. A key aim is to leverage existing assets and new resources to jumpstart a cross-sector biomass-based industry in Illinois in order to help diversify our agricultural landscape and markets. The student in the photo on the left is standing in front of one of the first field-scale stands of Miscanthus giganteus planted in the US nearly 30 years ago on Dr. Emily Heaton's home farm. The stand is still going strong and staying put. Research at the University of Illinois and elsewhere has shown that it's productive, but how does it become a viable crop? The Biomass Innovation Hub is designed to target the valley of adoption, as shown in this technology readiness chart. So often as you're going through the different phases of getting a crop to market, different technology readiness levels, you leave, the safe shores of academia and you wander out into this valley here where there's a lot of risk and industry isn't ready to take it up yet. And so what the Biomass Innovation Hub is trying to help move this through this risk. The hub will prototype products and help develop knowledge and teams to translate products to industry partners. We know that farmers are willing to grow new crops when they are sure there's a stable market for it. So the Biomass Innovation Hub was created to de-risk the supply chain. For example, Dr. Heaton is in conversations with Agritech and Genera about siting a facility in central Illinois for biomass-based packaging. Getting them to invest in building the plant will require about 10,000 acres of guaranteed production of miscanthus. They are working on lining up the producers and the investment in a closed-loop finance and production processing model to get the ball rolling. As an agricultural scientist, I feel grateful to University of Illinois' long-standing commitment to long-term thinking and planning. The inset in the lower right shows some ears of corn from the marrow plots, which were established in 1876, 150 years ago. The small ear of corn on the lower right-hand corner shows what happens when you harvest continuous corn for 15 decades without adding anything back. Dr. Andrew Marginot, professor of soil fertility in the Illinois Department of Crop Sciences, is the current director of the marrow plots. And here's a picture of where they are in the campus. In anticipation of the 150th harvest on the marrow plots, it's fitting to look back at this path-breaking study and consider what we've learned and think about what's next. And if you can come celebrate, we will be holding a public-facing celebration on October 28th this fall. So some key insights from the marrow plots. First of all, over the 150 years of this study, hybrid corn and synthetic fertilizers have led to tremendous increases in yields. There's also been quite a loss of organic matter, about 50% relative to the native prairie. And finally, that crop rotation with manure or fertilizer help reduce organic matter losses. Here you can see what happens when residues are returned, and an uptick in organic matter. And they also help maximize yields. So I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce the alma mater plots, which is an investment by the University of Illinois College of Aces to create a marrow plots 2.0. Dr. Andrew Marginot will serve as the director of the alma mater plots as well. The plots are located just to the east of our research farm headquarters on South First Street in Savoy, Illinois. And this aerial view of the alma mater plots shows the large scale. We have 64 1.2 acre experimental units, each individually tile drained, so we can look at nutrient budgets and water balance in relation to different management treatments. We're currently taking baseline crop and drainage tile measurements to help randomize the treatments that will begin in 2028. In the meantime, we're doing stakeholder listening sessions to ID the questions and systems that they want studied. So part of what we'll be looking at here is the potential for adding new crops to our rotations and targeting the type of niche systems that your group is interested in. And we want to think about what should be studied to help support Illinois agriculture over the next 150 years, a form of future-proofing, if you will. In addition to the core experiment at the alma mater plot site on campus, we will also be working with farmer cooperators to establish satellite spot plots around the state in a participatory research and extension network spanning relevant environmental gradients. Those sites will feature one or all of the main site treatments, allowing us to ask how treatments perform in different parts of the state, and to communicate with growers about early findings and to get feedback about potential updates to the study. In order to make sure that our treatments and experimental questions are as relevant as possible to growers across the state and remain relevant over time, Dr. Marginot and his team are doing stakeholder listening tours throughout the coming year. And as you can see from this map to the right, there are some areas of the state that are currently not represented, but we are working to get representatives there. If you're in Illinois and have growers that are interested in being part of this initiative, please let me know and I can connect you with Dr. Marginot. Although I've focused on two Illinois projects, I'd like to close by making the point that what we do in Illinois crop sciences is to use the various crop sciences disciplines, plant improvement, plant protection, agronomy and horticulture, data management and acquisition, to address grand challenges in agriculture, such as increasing population growth with the need for food security, changing production, climate, water quality, and renewable energy needs, to address the triple bottom line of sustainability, balancing productivity, profitability, and environmental health. We're excited for the opportunity to help Illinois future-proof its agricultural system, and looking forward to working together with some of you to help extend that to other states. Many thanks for your attention. If you would like to get involved or help support this work, please follow up with me after the talk. I'd be happy to take any questions now. Thanks very much.
If anyone has questions, please unmute and ask away, or if you'd like to put it in the chat, I'm happy to help read those out. I think you informed us very well, Adam. I'll wait a second to see if any questions pop up, though.
Well, I've got a question for the group.
Please.
What can you do as farm managers and rural appraisers to help the growers that you work with, the operations that you work with, find new opportunities that help them get out of these tight margin traps that they're in, where in Illinois, where those tight margins are pushing people to grow more and more acres, get over them in narrowing windows of time, and financially, it's very, very tough for our growers right now. They need new crops and new markets. And if you don't have answers, that's okay too. It's a hard problem. Okay, well,
Great.
thanks very much, folks. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Adam. We appreciate you as well and your support and everything that you've shared today. I hope you have a great rest of your day, everyone, and we will post the recording to the website behind the member wall. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.